The desert stretched as far as the eye could see. Waves of golden sand rolled across the land like a never-ending ocean. The sun hung high in the sky, painting everything in a bright and blinding light. Hot wind moved across the dunes, carrying with it a low whisper, as if the desert itself spoke in a language too old for anyone to understand. Mira stood at the top of a high dune, her scarf pulled tightly around her head to keep the sand out of her mouth and eyes. She looked down at the small camp below, where Raffi and Tomas were setting up the shade tent. It had been 5 days since the three of them left the city of Rasir, chasing after rumors of something buried under the sands. She remembered the words of the old trader who had given them the map. He had said that there was a place where the desert sang at night and where the wind spoke of the Desert King. Most called it a legend, but to Myra it felt like a truth waiting to be uncovered. Raffi waved from below. His voice carried faintly in the dry air. "Mira, come down. You will burn standing up there." She slid down the side of the dune, her boots sinking into the warm sand. By the time she reached the camp, her face was red from the heat. Thomas handed her a canteen, and she took a long drink. The water was warm, but refreshing all the same. "We should check the map again," Raffi said, while adjusting the tent ropes. "The dunes have shifted since yesterday. We might have gone too far east." Myra pulled the old leather map from her bag. It was covered with strange marks and faded ink. She had studied it many times, but still the details seemed to change with every glance. The only thing certain was the symbol of a tall spire drawn in the middle. According to the trader, this spire marked the entrance to the tomb. "The wind last night," Tomas said slowly. "It sounded like it was carrying voices." "I could not sleep," Raffi laughed. "Voices in the wind, that is just your mind playing tricks." But Mira was not so sure. She had heard it too, a low hum rising and falling as the wind moved between the dunes. It had not sounded like anything natural. By the afternoon they were walking again, the sun blazing above them. They followed the lines of the map, counting the dunes and valleys. The heat was heavy on their backs, and every step felt slower than the last. Then, just as the sun began to sink, something strange appeared on the horizon. At first Myra thought it was another dune, but as they came closer, the shape became sharper. A dark metallic point was jutting out of the sand. It rose high enough to catch the fading light and send it flashing into their eyes. "This is it," Myra whispered with excitement. The three of them hurried forward, their tiredness forgotten. The spire was smooth and cold to the touch, completely different from the rough sand around it. Half of it was still buried, but even the visible part was taller than any of them. "Looks like it has been here for centuries," Thomas said, brushing away the sand. They worked together, using small tools to dig around the base. As they removed more sand, faint lines of symbols appeared on the surface. The symbols glowed softly in the dim light, as if waking from a long sleep. Raffi stepped back, wide-eyed. "Do you see that they are glowing?" Myra ran her fingers over the marks. She had never seen writing like this before, but something about it felt familiar. The shapes reminded her of the symbols she had seen on an ancient data crystal during her studies in the city. "We need to camp here," she said firmly. This could be the entrance to the tomb. They set up their tents close to the spire. As night fell, the temperature dropped quickly. The stars spread across the sky in a great silver river, and the desert grew quiet except for the soft rustle of wind. Then the whispers began again. It was clearer this time. Not just a hum, but a pattern, like words spoken slowly. Myra sat outside her tent, listening. She could not understand the language, but it seemed to call to her, pulling her attention toward the spire. Raffi joined her, holding a lantern. "You hear it too?" he asked in a low voice. "Yes," she replied. "It is not just the wind." Tomas came out, his face pale. I think the voices are coming from inside the spire. They stood together in silence, listening. The glowing symbols on the metal seemed brighter now under the starlight. For a moment, Mira thought she saw them shift and rearrange themselves. But when she blinked, they were still again. Suddenly, the ground beneath them gave a soft rumble. Sand slid down from the side of the dune, uncovering more of the spire's surface. A narrow seam became visible, running down its length. It looked like a doorway. "This is it," Mira said again, her voice filled with wonder. "The Desert King's tomb is real." They stared at the seam, none of them speaking. The desert around them seemed to hold its breath. Then, without warning, the whispers stopped. The silence was so deep it felt heavy in their ears. Mira took a step closer, placing her hand on the seam. The metal was cool, almost icy despite the heat of the day. She had the strange feeling that whatever lay beyond was aware of them. "We should not rush," Tomas warned. "There could be traps or old machinery inside." Raffi nodded. "Tomorrow we will see if we can open it. Tonight we rest." They returned to their tents, but Mira could not sleep. She lay awake, staring at the glowing marks through the thin fabric of the tent. Somewhere deep below the sands, the tomb waited. She felt certain that the desert had guarded it for a reason, and that finding it was only the beginning of something far greater. Far out on the horizon, a faint flash of light lit up the night sky. It was gone in an instant, but Mira saw it. She wondered if it was just lightning, or if something else was watching the desert from afar. The whispers did not return, but she could still hear them in her mind, echoing softly as she drifted into uneasy sleep. The morning sun rose quickly, washing the dunes in a soft golden light. The air was cooler than the day before, but everyone knew that the heat would return soon. Mira stepped out of her tent and looked at the spire. The glowing marks were still there, dim in the daylight but steady and unchanging. Raffi was already awake, sitting near the spire with a small scanning device in his hands. He glanced up when he heard Mira approach. "I tried to read the metal," he said. "The surface blocks most of the signals. It is old technology, but still active." Mira knelt beside him. "The marks on it are not random. They feel like a kind of code. I think they are connected to the map we have." Tomas joined them, rubbing his eyes. "If this is a door, it might need more than just strength to open. Maybe it needs to be unlocked the way it was meant to be." The three of them spread the old leather map on the sand. The spire's symbol sat in the middle, surrounded by winding lines. Mira placed the map next to the glowing symbols on the spire, trying to see if they matched in any way. At first, there was nothing. But then Raffi tilted the map so the sunlight fell across it at an angle. The faded ink revealed something hidden thin. Silver lines that had been invisible before. They were shaped exactly like the symbols on the spire. "This is it," Mira whispered. The map was hiding this all along. The lines formed not just a path, but also a sequence of shapes. They looked like steps or stages. At the bottom of the sequence was a larger mark, a shape like a circle with three smaller points around it. It matched a glowing mark on the spire. Tomas tapped the circle on the spire with his hand. "This could be the starting point. If we follow the sequence, maybe the door will open." But as they traced the path on the map, they saw something else. Along the route to the center of the tomb, there were small symbols shaped like eyes. Beside each was a short mark that looked like a warning. Raffi frowned. "What do you think these eyes mean?" Mira answered slowly. "Maybe they are the guardians the traitor spoke about. Machines or traps set to protect the tomb." They fell silent for a moment. The desert was calm, but the thought of ancient machines hidden under the sands made the air feel heavier. By midday, they decided to explore the area around the spire before trying to open it. Mira walked north while Raffi and Tomas moved south. She followed the curve of the dune until the spire was out of sight. The wind picked up, carrying more sand across her path. Then she saw it. Half buried in the sand was a small pillar of the same metal as the spire. It was marked with glowing lines, faint but still alive. When she brushed away more sand, the top revealed a small square hole. Inside was a crystal-like object, warm to the touch. She carefully lifted it out. The crystal glowed brighter in her hand, sending soft blue light across her face. Back at camp, Rafi and Tomas returned with similar crystals, each one slightly different in shape. They placed them side by side. Together, the shapes matched the starting symbol on the spires. Door. This cannot be a coincidence. Tomas said, these crystals might be keys. They fitted the crystals into the mark on the spire. As soon as the last one clicked into place, the glowing lines brightened. A soft hum filled the air, and the seam in the metal widened just enough to reveal a dark gap inside. But before they could move closer, the humming stopped and the door closed again. It opened for a moment, Rafi said, but it shut before we could even look inside. Why? Myra studied the spire carefully. The sequence on the map came back to her mind. The keys are not enough. We must follow the path exactly. If we rush, the tomb will remain closed. That night, the wind rose again. This time, the whispers were different. They came in short bursts, almost like commands. Mira lay awake, trying to match the sounds to the symbols she had seen. It felt as if the tomb itself was testing them, waiting to see if they were worthy. Before dawn, she woke. The others, we start early. The path is not just underground. I think it begins here, in the dunes. Using the map, they set out. The route led them across ridges and valleys of sand. Every so often, they found another small metal pillar with glowing lines. At each one, they placed a crystal for a moment. Before moving on, the pillars seemed to come alive when touched, sending a low tone into the air that faded slowly after they left. By the time they returned to the spire, all the pillars they had visited were glowing faintly in the distance, like small stars scattered across the sand. The map sequence was now complete. This is it, Myra said. Now we try again. They fitted the crystals into the spire's mark once more. The glow spread faster this time, racing up the length of the spire until the whole surface shimmered in the sunlight. The hum returned, louder and steadier. The seam split open, and the door slid back to reveal a passage sloping down into the earth. A cool breath of air flowed out, smelling faintly of metal and dust. The inside was lit by a blue glow that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Rafi stepped forward, his voice low. We found it. The Desert King's tomb, but Mira did not move yet. She looked back at the glowing pillars on the horizon and thought about the symbols of the eyes on the map. The path ahead would not be empty. Something was still watching. Still, they had come too far to turn back now. One by one, they stepped into the passage, leaving the sunlight and the open desert behind. The door slid shut behind them, sealing them in the cool, glowing silence of the tomb's entrance hall. Somewhere deep below, the unseen guardians waited. The air inside the passage was cool and still. The walls were smooth and made of the same dark metal as the spire. A soft blue glow came from thin lines running along the walls, lighting their way without casting shadows. Myra walked in front, her eyes scanning every detail. Rafi followed close behind with a small scanner, while Thomas brought up the rear, keeping watch in case the door behind them opened again. The passage sloped down slowly, leading them deeper underground. Their footsteps echoed softly, and the sound felt louder in the quiet space. This place is alive, Rafi said in a low voice. The walls have power running through them. Myra nodded. It has been waiting a long time. After a few minutes, the passage widened into a circular chamber. The ceiling rose high above, and in the center stood a tall figure made of metal and stone. Its shape was human-like, but its head was smooth and featureless except for a single glowing eye in the middle. Its arms hung at its sides, but the way it stood felt watchful, as if it had been expecting them. The three of them stopped at the edge of the chamber. "That must be one of the guardians," Tomas whispered. The glowing eye brightened. A deep sound filled the chamber, like a voice but not quite human. The figure spoke slowly, each word clear in their minds, even though its mouth did not move. "Who comes to walk the path of the desert?" King Mira stepped forward. "We are explorers. From the surface. We seek the truth of the Desert King." The guardian's head tilted slightly. "Truth is earned. To pass, you must answer the questions of unity symbols lit up on the walls around them, forming 3 separate panels. Each panel showed a set of pictures and shapes. Mira moved closer, studying them. The first panel showed 2 groups of people standing apart, then joined together to build a single large structure. The guardian spoke again. The first question: "What is the strength that unites strangers under one banner?" Myra thought for a moment. "Trust," she said. "Without trust, strangers cannot work together." The glowing eye dimmed for a moment, then brightened again. "Correct. Trust is the first bond." The second panel showed a single traveler crossing a wide desert alone, then being joined by many others until they reached an oasis. The second question: "What must be shared for a journey to succeed?" Thomas stepped forward. "Hope. Without hope, the journey ends before it is done." The guardian's eye brightened again. "Correct. Hope carries the weary forward." The third panel was harder. It showed a scale, with gold on one side and a small group of people on the other. The side with people was heavier. The third question: "What is worth more than treasure?" Rafi's voice was steady. "Life. People are worth more than any gold or treasure." For a long moment, the guardian did not move. Then its eye flashed bright white, and the panels faded from the walls. "You have answered with wisdom. You may pass." The guardian stepped aside, revealing another passage behind it. But before they could move, it spoke again. "Beware. Not all guardians will speak. Some will only test the warning hung in the air as they passed the tall figure." Its eye dimmed again, but Mira felt it was still watching. The next passage was narrower, the walls closer. The glow was dimmer here, and the air cooler. Strange patterns ran along the floor, like lines in a circuit. After a while, they came to a fork. The map did not show this split. One path sloped downward, the other curved upward. "We should go down," Rafi suggested. "The tomb is deep underground," but Tomas shook his head. "Up might lead to a lookout or a safe path. If we choose wrong, we could be trapped." Myra thought about the guardian's warning. Some guardians will only test. Choosing the wrong path might be one of those tests. She closed her eyes, thinking about the sequence on the map. The glowing pillars outside had been arranged in a pattern. That same pattern might be here. She opened her eyes and looked at the floor lines. On the left, the lines curved gently, just like the map sequence. "This way," she said, pointing down the left path. They followed it, moving carefully. The slope grew steeper, and the glow faded even more. Soon they could barely see the walls. Rafi turned on a small lamp, its light bouncing off the smooth metal around them. Then the air changed. A faint hum rose from the walls, growing louder with every step. The floor under their feet vibrated softly. Ahead, a second guardian waited. This one was different. It was smaller, hunched forward, with 4 thin arms ending in sharp points. Its glowing eyes, 2 instead of 1, watched them without blinking. It did not speak. Instead, it moved suddenly, its arms spinning in a blur. The hum became a sharp ringing sound. Rafi pulled Myra back just in time as one of the arms swept across the passage, cutting through the air where she had been standing. This one is not here to talk, Thomas said quickly. The guardian moved forward, its steps silent but fast. The narrow passage left no room to run past it. They would have to act. Myra's eyes darted to the floor. The glowing lines here were brighter and pulsing in rhythm. She remembered how the first guardian had responded to answers. Maybe this one had its own pattern. Step only where the light is bright, she said. They moved together, placing their feet only on the glowing sections. The guardian struck at them again, but its movement slowed whenever they stayed on the bright spots. Slowly, they crossed the narrow space, the machine's arms swiping just behind them dot at the far end. The passage widened into another chamber. As soon as they stepped off the bright lines, the guardian stopped and returned to its place. Folding its arms neatly dot, they caught their breath, their hearts pounding. That was close, Rafi said. Myra looked ahead. If this is only the beginning, the deeper we go, the harder it will be. Thomas nodded. Then we keep moving. The tomb has guarded its secrets for a reason. They stepped into the new chamber, unaware that another set of eyes unseen and high above was watching every move they made. The new chamber was unlike the others. The floor was made of wide stone tiles, each carved with different shapes. The walls were tall and curved, showing moving images made of light. At first, the images seemed random patterns of stars, waves, of water and mountains, but soon they shifted into scenes of the desert. Mira stepped forward, watching closely. The glowing scenes showed people dressed in long robes, walking with camels across the sands. Then the images changed again, showing the desert king standing on a high dune, raising his hand toward the horizon. Behind him, the sky filled with strange silver ships that looked nothing like anything from Earth's past. Rafi pointed to the ships. Those are not from our history. The desert king must have met travelers from the stars. The floor gave low rumble. One of the stone tiles slid backward, and a gap opened in the floor. Careful, Thomas warned. Stepping back, another tile shifted, then another. Slowly, the entire floor began to move, the tiles sliding in different directions. The gaps between them grew wider, and the shapes on the tiles began to glow. Myra's eyes narrowed. This is a puzzle. We have to move across it in the right order. How do we know the right order? Rafi asked. She looked again at the glowing shapes. The tiles with stars, waves, and mountains matched the sequence of images on the walls. Follow the order shown in the pictures. Stars first, then water, then mountains. They stepped onto the first star tile. It stayed in place under there. Wait. But when Tomas stepped onto a tile with a mountain instead of a star, it shook and began to sink. He jumped back quickly. All right, he said, breathing hard. We will follow you. They moved carefully from tile to tile, following the star water mountain pattern. Every time they stepped on the wrong tile, it shifted and sank slightly before returning to place. The rumble grew louder as more tiles moved. Halfway across, the walls changed again. The sequence shifted, now it showed the desert, then an oasis. Then the desert again. It is changing, Rafi said quickly. Myra nodded. Now it is desert, oasis, desert. The path is shifting with the pictures. They adjusted their steps, moving slower, but the puzzle grew faster. The tiles began sliding without warning, creating sudden moving gaps. Mira jumped one, but when she landed, the floor beneath her shot forward. She cried out as she slid toward an open gap. Rafi reached for her, but the tiles between them moved apart, creating a long opening. In seconds, Myra was carried away from them, deeper into the chamber. Myra! Thomas shouted, but she was already too far. The floor under her stopped moving, leaving her stranded on a single wide tile surrounded by darkness below. The tile she stood on began sinking slowly, carrying her downward into another chamber. Myra landed softly on a new floor, the sinking tile fitting neatly into a circular hole. She found herself in a narrow hall lit by a pale green glow. The air here was colder, and faint mist curled along the ground. She called out for Raffi and Tomas, but her voice echoed without an answer. For the first time, she felt truly alone in the tomb. Ahead, the hall curved, leading her to a small round room. In the center stood a low pedestal with a round crystal resting on top. The crystal glowed faintly and pulsed as if it were breathing. She approached carefully. The moment she touched the crystal, the walls of the room lit up with holograms. She saw the Desert King again, but this time he was seated in a large chamber surrounded by people who looked both human and alien. They were speaking together, and Mira noticed that the king seemed to be giving them something, a map shaped exactly like the one she carried. The image faded, replaced by a symbol, a closed eye, then an open one. The meaning was not clear, but Myra felt it was important. She picked up the crystal, and the green glow in the room brightened. Somewhere above, she heard a deep mechanical sound, like something unlocking. Meanwhile, Raffi and Tomas struggled to finish the shifting floor puzzle. Without Myra's guidance, they made more mistakes, and the tiles shook violently under them. Finally, after a tense few minutes, they leapt onto a steady platform at the far end. They found themselves in another chamber, but Mira was nowhere in sight. She fell through, Raffi said, scanning the walls. There must be another way down. They spotted a narrow stairway hidden behind one of the moving wall panels. Without hesitation, they started down. The stairs twisted deeper underground, the air growing colder with every step. At the bottom, they entered a hallway that looked almost identical to the one Myra had found herself in. "Myra," Tomas called. His voice carried far, but returned only as an echo. They followed the hall until they reached a large door. In the center of the door was a round slot, the exact size of the crystal Myra had found. "She must have it," Raffi said. "If we can meet her here, we can open this." Myra, still holding the crystal, began moving back through the narrow hall. The mist swirled around her ankles as she retraced her steps. She heard faint voices ahead, Raffi and Tomas calling her name. Relief filled her chest. When they finally met in the hall, they wasted no time. Myra placed the crystal into the slot on the large door. It fit perfectly, and the green glow spread outward in a web of lines. With a deep rumble, the door slid open, revealing a vast space beyond. It was a great underground hall with high arches, filled with the sound of running water. Streams flowed across the floor into glowing pools. "This must be the inner section of the tomb," Myra said softly, but far in the distance, they saw movement, tall, shadowy shapes standing still, their eyes faintly glowing in the green light. More guardians were waiting. The great underground hall was silent, except for the soft sound of water flowing into glowing pools. The air felt different here, cooler and fresher, as if the place had been kept alive for centuries without ever opening to the desert above. Myra, Raffi, and Tomas stood at the edge of the hall, their eyes fixed on the shapes far ahead. The tall shadows were motionless, their faintly glowing eyes reflecting in the green light. Raffi whispered, "Guardians," Myra nodded. "Yes, but they are not moving." Cautiously, they stepped forward. The streams crossed their path, and they walked on narrow stone bridges. The water shimmered softly, as if it held its own light. The sound of each step echoed across the hall. As they drew closer to the figures, they saw that the guardians here were different. These were carved from stone and metal, their bodies covered with ancient armor. Their glowing eyes followed the explorers, but none raised a weapon. "It feels like they are watching us but allowing us to pass," Tomas said. "They might be protecting something important," Myra replied. The hall ended at a pair of massive doors, each covered in carvings. The carvings showed the life of the Desert King, his rise to power, his uniting of tribes, his meeting with strange travelers from the stars. In one carving, he stood beside beings with tall, thin forms, exchanging gifts of light. At the center of the doors was a mark shaped like the sun, surrounded by a ring of smaller symbols. Myra recognized it at once. It was the same as the final symbol on the old leather map. She reached out and touched it. The symbol glowed gold, and the great doors began to slide open. The sound was deep and slow, like the desert itself was waking. Inside was the throne room. It was the largest chamber they had seen. The ceiling arched high above, lit by a soft golden light that seemed to come from nowhere. The floor was polished stone, so smooth it reflected their shapes as they walked. At the center stood a great crystal throne, clear and shining, as if it had been carved from a single block of ice. But the throne was not empty. Seated upon it was a figure in long robes, his head covered with a crown shaped like rays of the sun. His eyes were closed, and he did not move. At first, they thought it was a statue, but the faint rise and fall of his chest told them otherwise. "Myra," Raffi said in awe. "He's alive." Around the throne were tall, glass-like pods. Inside each one stood a person, dressed in armor or fine robes, their faces calm as if they were only sleeping. Some were old, others young, men and women of many kinds, but all preserved perfectly. Tomas stepped closer to one of the pods. "These are not statues. They are people kept in some kind of stasis." A sudden voice filled the room, deep and clear. "You have come far, seekers." The three explorers looked around. The voice did not come from the figure on the throne, but from the air itself. The Desert King sleeps, awaiting the time of need. Around him stand his chosen, the warriors, the healers, the leaders of his time. This place is not a grave. It is a vault. Myra felt her heart beat faster. A vault for what? For humanity's strength, its wisdom, its unity, the voice answered. Long ago, the Desert King saw that the world would change, that the sands would cover cities and water would grow scarce. He made a pact with visitors from beyond the stars. They gave him the means to preserve his people for a day when the world would need them again. Raffi looked at the pods with new understanding. "These people have been asleep for centuries." "Yes," the voice replied. "They have waited in silence. When the time comes, they will wake and guide the living once more." The three stood in silence, trying to take in the meaning of what they had found. "Then the treasure is not gold or jewels," Tomas said softly. "No," Myra agreed. "The treasure is them." They stepped closer to the throne. As they did, the Desert King's eyes slowly opened. They were bright and steady, like the morning sun. He looked at each of them in turn, and though his lips did not move, they heard his voice in their minds. "You have walked the path. You have answered the questions. You have shown caution and courage. Tell me, why have you come?" Myra took a deep breath. "We came to learn the truth of the Desert King. We wanted to see if the legend was real. And now you see it is real," the king said. "But the truth comes with choice. The vault can be opened. My people can walk the world again. Yet every awakening changes the world. Once they rise, they will not return to sleep." Raffi frowned. "Why warn us about that?" "Because once opened, the old ways will meet the new. It can bring great unity or great division. You must decide if the time is right." The weight of the choice settled over them. Tomas stepped back, his mind full of questions. "If we do nothing, will they stay here forever, until the sands are gone or the world calls for them in its greatest hour?" The king answered. Myra looked around the throne room at the sleeping warriors and scholars. She imagined what it would mean for them to walk the world again. New ideas, old knowledge, leaders with wisdom from another age. It could heal the world, but it could also shake it. The king's voice grew softer. "Think well. The choice is yours." The golden light in the throne room dimmed slightly, as if the place itself was holding its breath. Myra turned to Raffi and Tomas. If we choose wrong, we could harm the world. But if we wait too long, the world might fall. Before they can help, Raffi's jaw tightened. I think we need them now. The world is broken in many places. Leaders like these could guide us. Tomas shook his head. The world today is different from theirs. They might not understand it. Their ways could clash with ours. The silence stretched, the sound of flowing water the only thing between them. The desert king waited, his eyes calm but unblinking. Myra knew they would have to decide soon. The tomb was not meant to stay open forever. The golden light in the throne room pulsed faintly, as if the very walls were listening. Myra stood between Raffi and Tomas, feeling the weight of the Desert King's words pressing on her mind. Around them, the sleeping figures in the glass pods stood like silent witnesses to the moment. Raffi spoke first. I say we wake them. The world needs strong leaders, people who can unite others. Look around, Myra. These people were chosen for their wisdom and strength. Keeping them here is like hiding medicine when the patient is sick. Thomas shook his head. And what if this medicine has side effects? They are from a different time. Their ways, their thinking, it could clash with how things work today. We might cause more harm than good. The king's voice moved through the air again. Every choice changes the river of time. No path is free from risk. Myra turned her gaze to the pods. The faces inside were calm, untouched by the passing centuries. She imagined them waking, opening their eyes to a new world of strange machines, new languages, and lands they did not know. What happens if they wake and find the world too different? She asked us softly. They will adapt, or they will lead the world back to ways that worked before. The king replied. But the change will not be small. Nations will feel it. Borders may shift. Power will move. Raffi's voice grew firm. Then maybe that is exactly what is needed. Too many in the world are lost. Too many follow selfish leaders. These ones were chosen for the good of all. Thomas crossed his arms. And how do we know that for sure? History is written by those in power. What if the king only chose people who served him? What if their return brings control instead of freedom? Myra stayed quiet for a long moment. She thought of their journey, the map, the trials, the halls of the tomb. Everything had been a test of wisdom, not just strength. The puzzles and paths had forced them to work together, to think before acting. Maybe the king had designed it this way to make sure only the right people reached him. She finally said, if the king wanted to rule again, he could have awakened long ago. Instead, he waits for others to decide. That tells me something about his intentions. The king's eyes glowed a little brighter. I do not rule the world above. I guard what is left of my time. Those who wake will shape their own path. My duty is to keep them safe until the right moment comes. The sound of flowing water seemed louder now, as if urging them to decide. Tomas stepped closer to the king. If we choose to wake them, how will it happen? The sun key on the great doors will turn. Light will pour into this hall. The pods will open. They will rise and walk with you into the world. Raffi smiled faintly. Then we should do it now. Myra raised a hand. Wait, we should not rush. This decision is bigger than our own wishes. We must think about what it will mean for everyone. She began to walk slowly around the room, looking at each sleeping figure. She saw a woman in armor with a steady face, a man in fine robes holding a tablet of stone, a young girl no older than 16 dressed in bright silks. She thought about the world above, the cities full of unrest, the desert villages struggling for water, the people longing for unity. Finally, she turned back to the others. We came here for answers, but maybe our journey was also a question. Are we brave enough to take a risk for the future? Raffi nodded at once. Yes. Thomas hesitated, then sighed. If we leave without waking them, the world will never know. What could have been? And if we fail, at least we will have tried. The king's voice came again, deep and steady. Then speak your choice clearly, for the vault will obey only the will of those who pass the tests. Myra looked at Raffi and Tomas. Together they stepped forward until they stood before the crystal throne. She spoke for all three. We choose to wake them. The golden light in the throne room flared brightly. The air grew warmer, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. A low hum filled the hall as the great sun symbol on the doors began to turn. The walls shifted, revealing narrow shafts that carried beams of sunlight deep into the chamber. The golden rays touched each pod, and the glass began to dissolve into mist. The sleeping figures stirred. Hands moved slowly. Eyes fluttered open. One by one, the chosen of the Desert King stepped forward, their movements calm but strong. The woman in armor was the first to speak. Her voice was clear and confident. We are called. The man in fine robes followed her, looking at Mira and the others with steady eyes. The time has come then. Lead us to the world. The young girl in silk smiled as if she had been dreaming of this moment. The sky awaits. The Desert King stood from his throne. His steps were slow but sure. His eyes held the weight of centuries, yet there was no weariness in them. He looked at the explorers. You have given the world a gift. It will be what it chooses to be. But know this, by opening this vault, you have joined our legacy. Mira felt the truth of his words settle deep in her heart. She knew they were stepping into something greater than themselves. The group moved toward the great doors. Outside, the desert sun was high and bright. The heat rushed in, carrying the scent of sand and wind. As they stepped into the light, Myra glanced back one last time at the throne room. It was no longer a silent hall of sleeping figures. It was alive, full of voices and footsteps, the sound of a new beginning. Raffi whispered, "The world will never be the same." Tomas replied, "Let us hope that is a good thing." The Desert King walked at their side, the chosen ones following, in a long line. Together, they crossed the sands toward a future no one could fully see, but one they had chosen with open eyes. The sun hung high over the endless dunes as Mira, Raffi, and Tomas led the long line of awakened ones across the golden sands. Each step left deep prints that the wind quickly began to cover, as if the desert wished to keep their path secret. The Desert King walked beside Myra, his posture tall and his eyes steady on the horizon. Around him, the chosen moved with quiet strength. They did not speak much, for the world before them was strange, and the air was heavy with the meaning of what had just happened. After many hours of walking, they reached the place where the dunes began to slope downward toward a wide valley. In the distance, the thin outline of a small desert village could be seen, its mud brick houses clustered around a tall water tower. Smoke rose in thin lines from cooking fires. Raffi smiled faintly. "That is Al-Najir. My uncle trades there sometimes. They will help us." Thomas looked at the village with a cautious eye. "Help, perhaps. But they may also fear what they do not understand." The Desert King turned his gaze to the village. "In my time, we often feared what was new. But fear can be turned to trust if the truth is shown." They continued toward the village. As they drew closer, some children playing in the dust noticed the group. Their laughter stopped, and they ran toward the houses, shouting to their elders. Soon a small crowd had gathered at the edge of the village. The elders of Al-Najir stepped forward, their faces lined with age and the hard life of the desert. One man wearing a long brown robe and a white turban spoke first. "Raffi, son of Karim, what is this you bring across the sands?" Raffi bowed respectfully. "Honored elder, these are travelers from the old times. They have been in the care of the Desert King. We have brought them here so they may see the world and help it." A murmur ran through the villagers. Some crossed their arms in doubt, while others leaned forward in curiosity. One woman whispered, "The old times," as if the words themselves were a forgotten song. The Desert King stepped forward. His voice carried like the wind over the dunes. "People of Al-Najir, I am the last ruler of a kingdom long turned to sand. These men and women with me were chosen to guard knowledge and strength. We come not to take, but to share and to guide." The elder studied the king's face for a long moment. Then he looked at Mira Tomas and Rafi. "If your words are true, then perhaps the desert has indeed given us a gift." But gifts from the sands are never simple. The villagers offered water and shade beneath a large tent. There the newcomers rested. The woman in armor told the children stories of courage. The man in fine robes spoke to the village elders about ways to store water more safely. The young girl in silks taught songs in a language no one had heard. For centuries, yet somehow it felt familiar. By evening, the air had softened with the cool touch of night. The stars began to shine above like scattered jewels. The elders of Al-Najir gathered with the Desert King and the explorers around the small. Fire Dot, the elder in the white turban, spoke. "If you wish to travel further, we can guide you to the city of Katara. There you will find many people and many ears for your words. But you must know this. The city is ruled by those who love power more than truth." The king nodded slowly. "Then the task is clear. We must bring light where shadows grow." Over the next days, the group traveled with the help of villagers. Word spread quickly ahead of them, carried by traders and travelers. By the time they reached the gates of Katara, a great crowd had gathered. Some came to see the strange clothes of the chosen ones. Others came out of pure wonder at the mention of the Desert King. The city guards looked uneasy, but allowed them through after hearing the elder's letter of introduction. Inside the walls, the air was thick with the scent of spices and the calls of merchants. The chosen ones moved through the busy streets, drawing the eyes of all. At the great plaza, the Desert King addressed the people. "Your city is strong, but strength without wisdom can turn to stone. We bring knowledge from a time when the desert was green. We offer it freely to all who will listen." Some in the crowd cheered. Others whispered in doubt. Yet the word spread like seeds in the wind. In the days that followed, the chosen taught the people about farming methods that could save water and heal the land. They showed ways to build homes that stayed cool in the heat. They spoke of justice that served all, not just a few. Myra, Rafi, and Tomas watched as the city began to change little by little. A new spirit seemed to move through its streets. Even those who had doubted began to see the value in what the chosen brought. One night, as they sat on a rooftop, looking out over the lantern-lit city, Rafi said quietly, "We did the right thing." Tomas nodded. "It will not be easy, but nothing worth doing ever is." Myra smiled faintly. "The sands keep their secrets for those willing to listen." We listened, and now the world listens back. Below them, the voices of the city rose into the night. The Desert King stood in the plaza speaking to a small group of children. The chosen ones moved among the people like living bridges between past and present. Far beyond the city walls, the desert stretched in every direction. But it no longer felt empty. It felt alive with the promise of change. The journey that began in the shifting sands had reached a new place yet. Its story was far from over. As the first light of dawn touched the horizon, the Desert King joined them on the rooftop. His eyes were calm and his voice steady. "You have not only awakened my people, you have awakened the future. Guard it well, for it belongs to all." And so under the endless sky, the explorers and the chosen watched the sunrise together, knowing that the desert would remember their steps for as long as the wind carried the sound of their names.